Chapter 1. The DNA Game Begins. Never imagined a simple DNA test could destroy the story of who I thought I was. For 36 years, I lived as a daughter, a wife, a teacher who believed her family was unshakable. But one email shattered everything. The results didn't just uncover a hidden sibling. They exposed a stolen identity, a bloodline claimed by someone else, and a betrayal that cut deeper than I ever thought possible. That small plastic tube pulled me into a storm of family secrets, inheritance fights, and the kind of courtroom battles that leave scars on everyone. I was the last person in my department to jump on the DNA trend. In October of 2019, after a long parent conference night at Roosevelt High in Portland, I clicked through an ad, ordered a kit, and told myself it was just curiosity. I swirled the little vial on my kitchen counter while Michael sorted mail at the table. He asked if I really wanted to know whatever might be hiding in my family tree. I laughed it off and said it would probably confirm a few Irish and a little Scandinavian that my mom always mentioned on holidays. I registered the barcode, sealed the package, and dropped it at the post office on my way to first period. It felt like tossing a paper airplane into a wind I could not see. Weeks passed during the gray stretch between Halloween and Thanksgiving. School was steady in the way late fall always is. Seniors bargaining for essay extensions. Freshmen learning how to annotate without coloring every line. I stacked poems on my desk and watched the rain thread down the windows. The kit slipped to the back shelf of my mind like a book I meant to read over break. The email arrived on a Tuesday before lunch. Your results are ready. I clicked without ceremony because I expected something tidy. The first page showed the usual pie chart, the percentages that matched the stories my mother kept alive at dinner tables. I almost closed my laptop. Then a tab flashed for DNA relatives with a little orange badge that said New Match. I tapped it and the list opened like a trapdoor beneath my chair. There at the top sat a woman named Rebecca Cole in Seattle with a predicted relationship that made the room tilt. Parent-child or full sibling. The site refined it to half-sibling, with an explanation about shared centimorgans that my English teacher brain skimmed but could not absorb. 50% shared DNA. Not a cousin, not a stray branch. A trunk. I stared at the screen long enough for the cursor to blink itself into a heartbeat. My first thought was absurd, that there must have been a lab error, or that I had somehow mixed up barcodes, even though the site had my photo next to the registration, and every instruction had felt foolproof. The second thought was colder. If Rebecca was real, then the foundation under my childhood was not. I felt something in my chest notch out of place. Michael came in from the garage carrying the reusable grocery bags. He asked if I wanted chicken tacos for dinner, or if I had the energy for anything more ambitious. I said that tonight was a taco night. My voice sounded like it belonged to a neighbor. He looked at my face and put the bags down slowly. He asked what happened. I turned the laptop so he could see the screen. He frowned in concentration, read the words twice, and sat beside me. He said that this did not change who I was. He put a hand on my shoulder like he was steadying a ladder. I nodded, but my mind had already walked back through rooms in my parents' house. Family albums under the coffee table. My dad teaching me to parallel park in a church lot on Saturdays. The time he drove through the night to get me from a failed camping trip in the Columbia Gorge. I felt loyalty and love flash up like heat. Then I saw my mother's careful eyes during long family conversations, the way she sometimes responded to questions by cataloging errands. I remembered an old photograph that my Aunt Carol once tried to tuck away at a reunion. A picture of my mother in her 20s at Alki Beach with a man whose name she said I would not remember. I closed the laptop and made myself breathe slowly. Michael asked if I wanted to reach out to the match or to wait until the afternoon and call my mother. I heard my own answer that waiting would not make the facts less sharp. We cooked in the quiet way you cook on thin ice. I chopped cilantro, he warmed tortillas, and the radio talked about traffic on I-5 like it did every evening. I could still teach second period the next day, and I could still say good morning in the hall. But something private had moved. After dinner, I logged back in. I clicked through the match details. The site suggested possible relationships and scenarios. It invited me to message the person if I wanted to connect. It also linked to a help page about what to do with sensitive results. I read the polite disclaimer about how consumer tests are not the same as court-ordered evidence, and how unexpected family findings may require conversation and support. The practical tone steadied me. Evidence is one thing in a lab and another in a courthouse. My mind filed that sentence away without knowing why. I opened Rebecca's profile. There were the bare bones people leave on these sites. Seattle area. A profile photo that looked like it had been taken at Discovery Park in spring. A line about being a family law attorney who likes hiking with a gray dog and reading on porches. I noticed her age, 38, 2 years older than me, close enough to imagine overlapping timelines, far enough to suggest secrets that started before I could form a memory. I typed a message and deleted it. I typed another, something simple and human, and deleted that too. I could not begin with a stranger. I had to start with my mother. Michael loaded the dishwasher and kept his voice even. He said that whatever conversation came next, he would sit in the other room if I wanted privacy, or stay at the table if I wanted him close. I told him I would call my mother first, and I would be fine. He knew better than to argue with the part of me that took hard things straight on. I walked into the living room and sat at the end of the couch where the fabric sagged a little from years of grading. I pulled up my contacts and found Mom under Linda. The phone rang 3 times. She answered with the voice she uses on ordinary days. I told her I had done one of those genealogy kits. I made my tone light. I said the results had arrived, and there was something odd. She went quiet. Not the quiet of a dropped call, the kind of stillness that means a person is choosing every breath. She asked what I found. I said that the site listed a woman named Rebecca with half my DNA, and that it suggested a shared parent. I asked her if that made any sense. There was the faint sound of a chair moving on linoleum. My mother said that those kits can be unreliable. She said that matches can be misleading. She said that sometimes these services use estimates that frighten people for no reason. She said that I did not need to dig into old mistakes because the past was past. She said more, but all I heard was the word mistakes echoing like a hallway. I told her I was not angry. I told her that I needed facts and time. I asked again if there was anything I should know about how our family was made. She said that she loved me. She said that my father loved me. She repeated that what mattered was the life we had built. She did not give me an answer. The call ended with the polite sentences families use when the real sentence is I cannot say. I sat there with the phone cupped in my palm and listened to the house. The heat clicked on. A car passed outside. Michael set a glass on a coaster in the kitchen, and then did not move so I would not feel watched. The sense of suspension reminded me of the moment between a question and a raised hand in class. Everyone knows someone must speak. Everyone waits for courage. I opened a box in the hallway closet, where we keep holiday things and shoe polish and a tangle of extension cords. Under a stack of tax folders, I found a shoebox full of old photographs that my mother gave me when we bought the house. I thumbed through snapshots with the glossy finish that belonged to the 90s and early 2000s. Birthday cakes, band concerts, a vacation at Cannon Beach where we lost a kite to a sudden gust. I kept going until a photo from the 80s slid loose. My mother at a picnic table in West Seattle, hair caught by wind, laughing with a man I did not recognize. He had the kind of smile that turns into a line at the left cheek. The background showed fairies moving like toy boats. On the back, my aunt had written a month and a year. It matched the time my mother would have been in nursing school. I carried the photo to the lamp and held it close. The man had the same gray-green eyes that look green in rain and gray in shade. My eyes. I felt an odd compassion for a younger version of my mother. The girl in the picture had no idea what kind of silence she would be asked to maintain. I put the photo in an envelope and wrote the date on the front. Not because it was proof, because I needed a place to start. I returned to the kitchen and told Michael that I was going to call Aunt Carol the next afternoon. Carol has a conscience like a bell. She rings when truth is needed. He nodded and said he would pick up groceries on his way home so I would not have to think about dinner. That night, I lay in bed with the laptop closed on the dresser, the window cracked to let in December air that smelled like wet cedar. I pictured a legal form with clean lines. I pictured a test done under order with chain of custody and signatures. Not because I wanted a courtroom, because clarity is a kind of mercy. I slept in pieces and woke before the alarm. The light outside was still bluish. I made coffee and packed a bag for school. I tucked the envelope with the photo into a folder, along with a sticky note that said Carol in my crooked teacher handwriting. The house was quiet in a way that felt like the moment before the orchestra lifts their instruments. I locked the door behind me and walked to the car. The air stung in the way Portland air does when the rain pauses and the cold steps in. I told myself that I would teach my classes, make my calls, and take the next true step when it presented itself. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 2: Cracks in the Family Portrait. The next afternoon, I called my mother. I asked if she could come over for dinner because there were some things I wanted to talk about. She hesitated, her voice clipped, then agreed. I cooked chicken with rosemary because it was her favorite, and I hoped the smell of something familiar might soften whatever wall she had started building. When she arrived, she kissed my cheek lightly, set her purse on the counter, and asked about school like nothing had shifted. I waited until we sat with plates between us before I said it. I told her I'd received my DNA results and that a woman named Rebecca showed up as my half-sibling. She set down her fork so slowly it scraped the plate. She said those tests could be misleading. I said I understood, but the numbers were clear. She stared at the table, then looked at me with a tight smile and said the words that would replay in my mind for weeks. That was long ago. It ended already. I asked what ended. She shook her head and said I would not understand, that there was nothing to gain from pulling up old mistakes. I reminded her that I was not a child, that truth mattered even when it was messy. Her hands trembled as she gathered the plates and carried them to the sink, though we had barely eaten. I followed, pressing again. She turned, eyes wet, and said, "Let it go, Anna, please." Her refusal did not stop me. The next morning, before school, I pulled out my birth certificate from the folder where I keep tax documents. I ran my fingers over the ink and noticed what I had never paid attention to before. The typeface around my father's name was slightly lighter, the spacing uneven, almost as if it had been retyped. I pressed the paper to the light and saw the faint outline of correction fluid. That evening, I dug deeper. I opened the shoebox of photographs again and flipped through until one slipped free. A picture of my mother at a 4th of July picnic in Seattle, smiling at a tall man with dark hair. His hand rested on her shoulder like they belonged to each other. On the back, in faded pen, it read, July 1982. I was born in February of 1983. My pulse quickened, as if my body already knew what my mind did not want to admit. The tension followed me into family gatherings. 2 weeks later, my cousin Amanda hosted a birthday dinner for her husband in their West Hills home. The dining room buzzed with laughter and wine glasses clinking. I kept my face neutral, but Amanda never missed a chance to needle. As the conversation turned toward inheritances and family trust funds, she smirked and said some people at this table should be grateful to belong at all. The table went quiet for a breath. My uncle cleared his throat. Amanda's smile widened. She added that not everyone's bloodlines were as simple as they seemed. My stomach clenched. I asked her what she meant. She shrugged and said she was only joking, but her eyes glittered with something sharper. After dessert, she pulled me aside near the patio. She whispered that she had seen my name on one of those genealogy sites and that gossip traveled fast. She told me not to take it personally, but the family name was important. I walked away before my anger spilled out. The next morning, scrolling through my phone in the faculty lounge, I saw Amanda's new post, a filtered photo of the dinner table with a caption that said, "Family is everything, but sometimes it is not what it seems." Comments bloomed beneath, people laughing, asking who she meant. My chest burned. It was not just family now, it was public humiliation. That night, I sat at my desk, the birth certificate laid out beside the faded photograph. My mother's words echoed. That was long ago. It ended already. But the evidence in front of me said otherwise. The silence hurt worse than any confession could have. I thought of my students and how I tell them stories matter. That truth is not always easy, but it sets the course of who we are. I realized I had to keep digging, even if the answers split the ground under me. Michael found me staring at the documents. He said quietly that he would support me, whatever I chose to do next. I told him I needed to call Aunt Carol, that she might be the only one willing to speak plainly. He nodded, kissed the top of my head, and went to lock up the house. I folded the photograph back into the envelope and placed it with the certificate. My hands shook, but my resolve had hardened. The time for waiting was over. I was going to uncover the truth, no matter how many walls of silence I had to push through. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 3, Whispers and Shadows. I dialed Aunt Carol's number the next evening, my fingers damp on the screen as I waited for her to pick up. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm but cautious. "Anna, it's been a while. Everything all right?" "I need to see you," I said, trying to keep my tone even. "It's about Mom. And about me. Can I come by this weekend?" There was a pause long enough to hear the click of her clock in the background. "Come Saturday afternoon. I'll put on a pot of coffee." Some things shouldn't be said over the phone. When Saturday arrived, I drove across the river to her bungalow in Vancouver, Washington. The house was the same as it had been since I was a child, with its porch swing and wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. She greeted me with a hug, studied my face, and ushered me inside. We sat at her round kitchen table, the one with a faded sunflower tablecloth. I set the envelope with the photo and my birth certificate between us. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Aunt Carol, I think Mom has been hiding something about my father. I found this photo and I did a DNA test. It says I have a half-sibling. Do you know anything?" Her eyes softened and she reached across to squeeze my hand. "Anna, I always hoped your mother would be the one to tell you. She and Edward Cole, they were close, years before you were born. It wasn't a fling. It was real. But he was married then, and when things got complicated, she made choices to protect you." The name fell heavy between us. "Edward Cole," I repeated, as if the syllables themselves could explain why my chest felt both hollow and full. She nodded. "He was a real estate developer in Seattle. Did well for himself. He passed in 2015. There was a probate case in 2016. I followed it in the papers. He left a trust worth around $8 million, maybe a little more, but with a clause. It said only his bloodline could inherit." Blood only, Anna. That was his way of keeping things in the family. I pulled in a sharp breath. "You're saying he could be my father?" Carol's eyes brimmed with something between sorrow and relief. "I believe so. Your eyes, your timing, the way your mother kept certain things off limits. She never wanted you to feel less loved by Richard, the man who raised you. But love and truth don't always walk together." I leaned back, my head pressing against the chair. The photo of my mother and the man at Alki Beach blurred as tears filled my eyes. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I whispered. "Because secrets felt safer than shame back then," Carol said gently. "But secrets have a way of growing sharp edges." The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked. Inside me, everything tilted. I felt banged up like a house after a storm, still standing, but not the same. I left Carol's with the envelope clutched to my chest. The drive north to Seattle felt inevitable. I needed more than secondhand truths. I needed to stand where Edward Cole lay. The cemetery was quiet when I arrived, tucked in the green slopes overlooking Lake Washington. I walked the rows until I found his stone. Edward James Cole, 1948 to 2015. Beloved father. My throat tightened at the inscription. Beloved father. I crouched, touched the cold granite, and tried to picture him alive. Did he ever wonder about me? Did he walk through Pike Place Market and think of a child in Portland he would never claim? Did he write me into his trust, only to erase me later? Michael had offered to come, but I told him I needed to face this alone. The December air cut through my coat, yet I stayed there, kneeling in the damp grass. I felt the weight of my mother's silence, the sting of Amanda's gossip, and the echo of Carol's confession. The puzzle pieces had edges now, and they were slicing into place. I spoke softly, not caring if anyone heard. "If you are my father, then your silence shaped me. And if you are not, your shadow still follows me. Either way, I will find out." The words hung in the air, simple and unadorned, but they steadied me. As I walked back toward the car, I thought of the clause Carol had mentioned. Bloodline only. If the courts had enforced it in 2016, then someone like Rebecca could have a rightful claim. And if I was truly his daughter, I might as well. The thought was less about money and more about recognition, proof that I had not been built on a lie. By the time I reached the car, the sun was sinking behind the Olympic Mountains. Shadows stretched across the grass. My reflection in the windshield looked older than I remembered. I sat behind the wheel and let the quiet wrap around me. For the first time since the email from the DNA site, I allowed myself to imagine the possibility fully. Edward Cole might not be a name in a file or a stranger in a photograph. He might be my father. I started the engine, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and pulled onto the road back toward Portland. My mind churned with questions that had no soft landings. The silence of my mother had been a shield. Now that shield was gone, and all that remained was the sharp light of truth waiting just ahead. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 4. The Hidden Sibling. I drove back up to Seattle 2 weeks later, with a knot in my stomach that no amount of coffee could untangle. Rebecca had agreed to meet me at a cafe in Capitol Hill. The place was crowded with students and young professionals hunched over laptops. But I spotted her immediately at a corner table. She had the same gray-green eyes I saw in the photo of Edward at Alki Beach, and the sight of them mirrored back at me made my pulse quicken. She stood as I approached, extending her hand with practiced composure. Anna, Rebecca. We sat, the clatter of dishes and low music filling the silence we carried. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she leaned forward, her tone clipped. "So, you found me. I didn't know I was looking for you until the results appeared," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But yes, I needed to see you face to face." Her lips pressed together before she spoke again. I wondered how long it would take. I knew Edward had other ties. My mother kept quiet, but whispers slipped through. Still, I did not expect a half-sister to land in my inbox from a genealogy site. I didn't either, I admitted. But here we are. The server brought us coffee. I stirred mine just to give my hands something to do. Rebecca watched me closely. "I assume you've spoken to your mother," she said. I nodded. She told me nothing, except that it ended long ago. My Aunt Carol was the one who admitted there had been something with Edward. Rebecca let out a dry laugh. Something. That's one way to put it. He was my father in every way that counted, but even I sometimes felt like an afterthought. He was always protecting his reputation. So if he fathered you too, I am not surprised she kept it hidden. Her words stung, though not because they were cruel. They were too calm, too factual, like a lawyer laying out evidence. "I came to understand, not to fight," I said carefully. Rebecca tilted her head. "Understanding is one thing, but you do realize this changes more than family dinners. His estate, the trust, $8.2 million tied to a bloodline clause. That clause is no small thing." I felt heat rise in my chest. "This isn't about money for me. It's about knowing who I am." "For you, maybe," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "For me, it is about recognition. For years, I was the shadow child, acknowledged but not celebrated. Now, a trust written with bloodline only sits in probate records, and the courts value DNA above silence. Do you see where this is heading?" I looked down at my cup. The words formed slowly. "You're talking about a petition." "Exactly. A petition to reopen the case and confirm rightful heirs. That means you, if you prove it. That means me without question. And yes, it will make noise. Families fracture in courtrooms, Anna. They don't mend." Her bluntness sliced through me. "You would drag this into court instead of meeting me here like sisters?" Her laugh was quick, bitter. "Sisters? Blood does not make us sisters. Choice does. You might want a bond, but what I want is acknowledgement and my rightful share." I swallowed hard. And if the petition harms everyone involved? If it tears apart lives? She met my gaze without blinking. Then so be it. Justice is not gentle. It never has been. The conversation stalled. Around us, the cafe carried on, oblivious. Students typed. A barista called out a latte order. Someone laughed at a joke from across the room. I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. Before I could speak again, a woman in her 40s approached our table. Rebecca stiffened. "Barbara," she said curtly. The woman looked me up and down, her expression sharp with curiosity. "So this is the mystery sister," Barbara said. "Interesting. Edward certainly left a trail." Rebecca's jaw tightened. "Not now." Barbara ignored her. "If you two think you're the only ones with a claim, think again. I was his daughter from his first marriage. I got pushed aside once already. I won't be again." I found my voice. "The trust has clear terms. Bloodline only, yes, but standing matters. Do you even have legal grounds?" Barbara's smirk faltered. "I will find them. Don't underestimate me." She turned on her heel and left, her presence lingering like smoke. Rebecca sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Ignore her. She has no legal standing. She just wants a piece of the fight." I stared at Rebecca, my chest tight. This is all becoming more than I imagined. I came here hoping to find answers, maybe connection. Instead, I feel like I'm preparing for battle. She leaned back, folded her arms, and delivered the line that froze me. "Then prepare, Anna. Because we will meet again, but not at a cafe, not at a family table. The next time we face each other, it will be in court." The words landed with the weight of a gavel. I sat frozen, coffee cooling untouched, realizing the quiet search for truth had just shifted into something far more public and far more brutal. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 5, The Courtroom Storm. The legal papers arrived in January of 2021, thick envelopes stamped with King County Superior Court. Rebecca had filed a petition to reopen Edward Cole's estate, citing new evidence of heirs. My name was listed beside hers, though not as an ally, but as a potential competitor. Reading the documents felt like standing in a cold wind. Every line was another reminder that my search for truth had dragged me into a courtroom I never wanted. When I told my mother, she looked away, her hands clutching a dish towel. "You should never have gone digging," she said. "I had a right to know," I answered, my voice sharp. "And now it's too late to pretend nothing happened." Richard refused to speak to me at all. Amanda, emboldened, began posting on social media about how family loyalty mattered more than DNA. Her captions grew sharper, each one a dart thrown my way. At the first hearing, the courtroom buzzed with reporters and curious onlookers. Rebecca sat with her attorney, poised and calm. Barbara lurked in the back row, her presence a reminder that greed attracts shadows. I sat at the other table with my attorney, Catherine Brooks, a woman with a crisp suit and a voice that could cut through noise like a blade. Judge Miller, a man with silver hair and steady eyes, called the session to order. He reviewed the petition and then looked directly at me. "Mrs. Harrison, the DNA test you submitted through 23andMe is not admissible for probate. This court will require either a court-ordered DNA test, or, if that is not possible, an avuncular test with surviving relatives of Mr. Cole." Catherine stood. "Your Honor, we are prepared to comply. We have already identified one of Mr. Cole's brothers willing to participate." Rebecca's lawyer nodded with satisfaction. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. The intimacy of family was now evidence on a docket. During recess, Amanda cornered me in the hallway, her voice dripping with contempt. "You've embarrassed us enough. Do you realize what you're doing to Dad? To all of us?" I clenched my fists at my sides. "The truth is not embarrassment. It's reality. If you can't handle that, it's not my problem." She smirked. "Reality is whatever people believe. And right now, people believe you're betraying your own family." I walked away before my anger boiled over. Weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Catherine guided me through every step, her patience a steady anchor. One evening, she slid a folder across her office desk. "We found records," she said. "Bank transfers from Edward Cole to your mother between 1982 and 1985. Regular amounts. Enough to prove financial support during your early childhood." My throat tightened as I studied the documents. The neat lines of numbers spoke louder than any whispered rumor. "This is real," I said softly. Catherine met my eyes. "This is the kind of evidence judges listen to. Combined with the avuncular test, it will strengthen your position significantly." The trial sessions grew heavier. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras flashed outside the courthouse. Rebecca remained calm, her posture unshaken. I felt the weight of every gaze, every whisper that I had turned against my own family. One afternoon, during cross-examination, Rebecca's lawyer tried to paint me as opportunistic. "Mrs. Harrison, did you or did you not contact your Aunt Carol only after discovering a potential inheritance?" I gripped the stand, forcing myself to breathe. "I contacted my aunt because I wanted to know the truth about my family. The money was never the reason. The truth was." The lawyer smirked, but Catherine rose swiftly. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is mischaracterizing my client's motives. The financial records prove Edward supported Ms. Carter during Anna's early life. This is about acknowledgement, not opportunism." Judge Miller banged his gavel lightly. "Sustained. Move on." Amanda sat behind Rebecca, her expression triumphant every time a question cut close. But as the bank records were introduced, her face faltered. The numbers told a story she could not twist. Catherine presented them with precision, highlighting each monthly transfer. She spoke clearly. "These payments coincide exactly with Anna Harrison's early years. They demonstrate Edward Cole's knowledge of her existence and his responsibility. This is not speculation. This is documented fact." Rebecca's calm cracked for the first time. She whispered sharply to her lawyer, her jaw tight. The courtroom murmured. When the judge adjourned for the day, I stepped out into the damp Seattle air, feeling both drained and stronger. For the first time since the petition began, the tide felt like it was turning. Michael waited for me on the courthouse steps. He slipped his arm around my shoulders. "You did well," he said quietly. "I felt like I was drowning," I admitted. "But you didn't drown," he replied. "You kept breathing. That matters." I leaned against him, the folder of financial records pressed to my chest like a shield. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, Rebecca did not hold all the cards. The evidence had given me ground to stand on, and I would not let it slip away. The city lights flickered on as we walked to the car, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that justice might lean toward truth after all. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 6, Betrayal Laid Bare. The next hearing began under a sky the color of slate, the kind that pressed down on the courthouse steps and made the air heavy. I sat at the petitioner's table, Catherine beside me, while Rebecca and her counsel took their places across the aisle. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, a reminder that legacies lived and died in documents here. Judge Miller entered, adjusted his glasses, and called the case forward. His voice was steady as he explained that testimony from key family members would now be heard. My chest tightened when he said my mother's name. Linda walked slowly to the witness stand. Her shoulders curved inward, her hands folded like she was bracing for a storm. She swore the oath and sat down, eyes darting around the courtroom, but never landing on me. Catherine stood for the first question. "Mrs. Carter, did you have a relationship with Edward Cole in the early 1980s? My mother's lips pressed thin, then parted. "Yes, it was more than friendship." The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Gasps rustled through the benches. My father, Richard, seated behind the rail, stiffened. Catherine continued, her tone firm but not cruel. "Did Edward Cole provide financial support to you during that time?" Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Yes. He knew about Anna. He wanted to do more." Rebecca's attorney rose quickly. "Objection, speculation about intentions." Judge Miller nodded. "Sustained. Witness, keep to what you know directly." Linda gripped the edge of the stand. "Edward told me he wanted to include Anna in his trust. He said he had already spoken to his attorney about amending the terms. But I begged him not to. I was terrified of what it would do to my marriage, to Richard's reputation. I told him no. I told him to leave her out." My breath caught. My hands trembled in my lap. She had just admitted, under oath, that I was meant to be recognized. But her fear erased me from my own lineage. Richard rose suddenly, his voice breaking. "So all those years I was nothing but a stand-in? All those nights I thought I was her father?" The judge's gavel cracked. "Order. Mr. Harrison, sit down or you will be removed." Richard sank back, his face pale, eyes hollow. He looked at me not with love, but with something colder, as if I were a stranger who had betrayed him. Catherine guided the testimony back, entering the bank statements as exhibits. The courtroom filled with the soft shuffle of papers, the rustle of pens, but all I could hear was my mother's confession replaying. During recess, I tried to approach Richard in the hallway. "Dad, please, I never asked for this. I never wanted—" He cut me off, his voice low and jagged. "You are not the daughter I thought I had. I don't even know who you are anymore." The words carved into me deeper than any lawyer's argument. As if the day had not already torn enough, Barbara appeared with a stack of papers in her hands, her lawyer trailing behind. She filed a motion to intervene, claiming her place as Edward's eldest daughter entitled her to challenge the trust. The court reviewed it swiftly. Judge Miller was unmoved. "Ms. Cole has no legal standing under the current petition. The motion is denied." Barbara's face flushed with anger as whispers ran through the gallery. She gathered her papers with jerky movements and stormed out. The final moments of the day spiraled into chaos. Linda sobbed on the stand. Richard sat stone-faced. Rebecca whispered furiously with her attorney, and Amanda, always eager to pour salt, leaned over the bench to mutter loud enough for others to hear. "She's torn this family apart, all for money." I turned, fire in my chest. This was never about money. This was about truth. And if you cannot see the difference, that's on you. Her smirk faltered, the room catching every word. For once, the whispers did not circle around me. They circled around her. Judge Miller called the session to a close. "We will reconvene with final arguments after the court-ordered DNA and additional evidence are processed." His gavel fell, sharp as thunder. The room erupted in voices. My mother wept openly, her hands shaking as she reached for tissues. Richard walked past me without a glance. Amanda looked smaller than her cruelty, shrinking under the judgmental eyes of relatives who had heard too much. I stood frozen in the aisle, the world tilting again. My heart was heavy with betrayal, but there was also a strange clarity. The silence that once protected me had shattered, and with it, the illusion of family I had clung to. Catherine touched my arm gently. "Anna, we made progress today. Painful as it is, the truth is now on record. That matters." I nodded, my throat thick, unable to trust my voice. As I stepped into the damp Seattle evening, the courthouse lights flickering behind me, I realized nothing would be the same again. Whatever judgment came next would not just decide inheritance. It would decide who I was allowed to be, and what family even meant when blood and loyalty no longer aligned. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 7, The Aftermath and Reckoning. The final ruling came in the spring of 2024. I sat in the packed courtroom, my palms damp against my skirt as Judge Miller read the decision. His voice was calm, measured, but every word carved into me. Rebecca was granted her share of Edward Cole's trust. The DNA evidence, clear and indisputable, confirmed her place. My name followed, validated by the avuncular test with Edward's brother and the financial records of support. I was recognized as well. A murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca kept her face composed, but her knuckles whitened where she clutched her pen. I felt relief tangled with grief, because acknowledgement had finally come, but it carried a price I could never pay off. When we left the courthouse, reporters crowded the steps. Microphones stretched forward, questions firing. "Anna, do you feel vindicated? Is this about money or identity?" Rebecca pushed past without a word. I whispered to Catherine that I needed space, and she cleared a path for me. That night, I returned to Portland. The house was quiet, Michael waiting with dinner untouched. He studied my face. What did they decide? "They recognized me," I said softly. "And her. Both of us." He let out a breath and pulled me into his arms. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean into the comfort, but the image of Richard's face in court wouldn't leave me. The Harrison family fractured under the weight of the judgment. Richard withdrew from everyone, retreating into a silence colder than any winter. When I called once, he answered, then hung up after only 2 words. Linda carried shame like a heavy coat, showing up at church with her head bowed, avoiding neighbors who whispered too loudly. Amanda lost her shine entirely. Friends who once laughed at her cutting remarks now distanced themselves. One of her old posts resurfaced, mocking me, and the comments turned cruel. She deleted her account within days. I watched all of it from the sidelines, numb at times, furious at others. The truth had set me free but left wreckage behind. One evening, I drove to the old Harrison house where I had grown up. The lawn was trimmed but lifeless, the curtains drawn. I sat in my car, staring at the windows where my childhood had unfolded. For the first time, I understood that those walls no longer belonged to me. I stepped inside when Linda finally opened the door. She looked smaller, her eyes shadowed. "Anna," she whispered, as though saying my name might break her. "I came to see the house one last time," I said. She nodded and let me wander. The living room smelled the same, faintly of lemon polish. My old bedroom still held a faded poster on the wall, though dust clung to the corners. I sat on the bed, the weight of years pressing down. When I came back to the kitchen, Linda's eyes were wet. "I thought I was protecting you," she said. "From scandal, from judgment. I never imagined I was stealing your right to belong." I wanted to shout, to demand why my existence had been erased. Instead, I only asked, "Was it worth it?" She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. I left quietly, walking into the night air that smelled of spring rain. The house behind me was no longer my anchor, but a place of ghosts. Rebecca called a week later. Her tone was steady. The court recognized both of us. "That's what I wanted. Whether we like it or not, we share this bloodline." "I know," I said. "We don't have to be friends," she continued. "But we can at least not be enemies." There was a pause, long enough to feel fragile. "I don't want more enemies," I admitted. We ended the call without promises, but without venom either. Later that month, at a small gathering of extended relatives, I saw how the tides had shifted. A cousin who once avoided me crossed the room to press my hand. "You were braver than all of us," she said softly. Her words startled me. I realized some had admired the fight, even if they had been too afraid to stand beside me. Yet even with acknowledgement, I carried loss. Sitting alone in my childhood room that last time had made it clear. I had gained a sister, but I had lost the version of family I once believed in. One night, I sat in my current home, the lights dim, Michael asleep upstairs. I curled into the armchair by the window, staring at the quiet street. The silence was heavy, but not unbearable. It was the silence of endings and beginnings tangled together. I whispered to myself, as though confessing a secret. I had to lose one family to find another. The words echoed in the stillness, true and unchanging. Support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe for the next chapter. Chapter 8, Redefining Family. In the spring of 2025, I met Rebecca at a small community center in Seattle, the kind of place with bulletin boards layered in flyers and the faint smell of fresh paint. We had both been invited to help organize a charity event for families facing housing insecurity. At first, I thought it would feel awkward, but when we began sorting boxes of donated clothes side by side, something loosened in me. She handed me a stack of folded jeans. Funny, isn't it? After all the noise in court, here we are stacking pants. I smiled. Maybe this is what healing looks like. Doing something that matters outside of ourselves. She glanced at me, her eyes softer than they had been in any courtroom. Edward would have liked this. He always believed appearances mattered most, but he also wrote checks quietly to shelters. I found them in his files after the probate closed. I paused, jeans in hand, and said, maybe that's where I got it from. The part of me that wants to help, even when no one notices. We worked through the afternoon, the conversation gentle, without sharp edges. For the first time, I felt less like I was staring at an adversary, and more like I was standing beside someone who understood the fracture of being both seen and hidden. By summer, we had organized 2 more events together. Word spread, and people began to associate our names not with the trial, but with the programs we supported. It was a small twist of fate, but one that gave me a sense of purpose. Meanwhile, the rest of the Harrison family unraveled quietly. Richard moved into a small condo near the river and kept to himself, rarely answering calls. Linda remained in the old house, attending church but avoiding eye contact with neighbors who remembered too much. Her name carried a weight of whispers that no amount of polite smiles could erase. Amanda tried to rebuild her reputation, but the same friends who once applauded her sarcasm now turned away. I heard she had lost invitations to parties she once hosted proudly. The trust case closed officially that fall. Catherine sent me the final paperwork with a note that the file was complete and the funds distributed. The legal storm that had consumed years of my life ended with a plain manila envelope. I held it in my hands, then placed it in a drawer, more interested in what came next than what it held. One cool October evening, Rebecca and I sat on the steps of the community center after another long day of work. Children laughed in the distance, their voices carrying through the crisp air. She leaned back, gazing at the fading sky. Do you ever think about how different things could have been if the truth had come out earlier? All the time, I said. But maybe the timing was what it had to be. Maybe we wouldn't have been ready for each other before. She nodded. Family is strange. It's supposed to be about blood, but in the end, it's about choice. Who we let close, who we forgive. Her words settled into me, true and steady. That night when I returned home to Portland, I sat with Michael and told him that for the first time, I felt like the chaos had given me something steady. Not the family I grew up believing in, not the parents who had betrayed and concealed, but the family I was slowly building out of choice. The grief had not vanished. It still lived in quiet corners, in the sound of my father's voice telling me I was a stranger, in the sight of my mother's shoulders hunched under shame. But alongside the grief was something else, a clarity that resilience is born not from what we lose, but from what we choose to carry forward. As the year closed, I stood in front of my classroom one morning, sunlight spilling across the desks. I told my students that stories shape us, that sometimes the hardest truths give us the clearest direction. Their young faces listened, and I realized I was not just teaching literature. I was passing on the lesson my life had carved into me. Family is chosen, not only blood. That is what carried me through betrayal, through courtrooms and broken bonds, through whispers that once cut deep. And that is what allowed me to sit beside a sister I never knew I had, working together to turn pain into something useful for others. If you have ever faced betrayal within your own family, if you have lived through secrets that fractured what you thought was solid, I invite you to share your story. Tell me how you endured, how you found your footing again. Our experiences may differ, but in speaking them aloud, we find connection, and in connection, we find strength.